podcast.
Energize the possibility. From my therapist's lips to your waiting ears, energize the possibility. We were talking in my most recent session about a darkness I have felt descending upon the world and upon my fragile, tender soul. Past couple weeks, I've been down. I've been pulled down just a little bit, kids, and I think it's justifiable. All right, the state of things, stuff that's going on in politics, stuff that's going on in the world. You're somebody like me with a well-developed sense of justice and some knowledge of history. You take a look around, there's lots to be upset about. There is a lot to be angry about. There is a lot that one could project into a dark and forbidding future. And I have found myself, if you've listened to last week's episode, you'll know I found myself wrapped up just a little bit in the projections. And it's knocked me off balance. Last week I talked about being off center, pulling yourself back into the center. And I've had to wrestle with that for the past week or so, as I have struggled to pull myself back into the center. And I'm talking with my therapist about this, and a lot of therapy is just me talking. I've talked about this before. It's a lot of me talking and a lot of my therapist listening. She does not say a lot during our sessions. It's just an opportunity, a venue, a vehicle through which I can talk my way through some of the stuff. And I came to this realization that I've been down over the past couple of weeks, and it is not difficult to be down over the past couple of weeks if you are paying attention. And it's particularly not difficult to be down over the past couple of weeks if you are overpaying attention, as I have been. Because the news is, to say the least, unsettling and downright maddening. And if you spend too much time being absorbed in, being engrossed by the news as it comes across the screen, and the news is frigging endless. It's coming at us so fast it's hard to comprehend it all. And then you find yourself wandering into YouTube videos by people who are justifiably angry, expressing that anger, and you absorb that anger if you are a neophyte like I am. You absorb that anger, and in my case, you begin to project forward, right? And I talked last week about staying here, being here now. Now, this is advanced. It's basic but advanced spiritual practice. It is simple but not easy spiritual practice to keep your thoughts, to keep your attention here, now, in the present moment, which, as I said before, is most of the time just fine. I tend to get wrapped up in projections, and that is forgivable at this moment, okay? Because I'm living in a kind of personal purgatory, whereby my marriage is ending, okay? And I am in a contract position with an undetermined end date. It's got an ending range, all right? There's a timeline, but it's not very clear exactly when this is going to end. And my life is going to change, all right? My life is already changing. That contributes in some ways also to my low mood, because change is difficult. And a breakup, even if amicable, is difficult. And there are just going to be times when it gets to you. And if you are already in a vulnerable state, in a weakened state, as I've talked about before, by the political news and by what's going on, you're just more susceptible to being low about other stuff, you know? I've wrestled with that over the past couple of weeks too. I've been thinking about my future because up to a point it's necessary to think about my future. And then you look at the world around you and you think, well, there isn't going to be a future. Or it's going to be one dystopian hellscape of a future, and it's not difficult to let your attention and to let your thoughts go down that wandering path because there's so much anger and so much potential darkness. And you feel this, if you're like me, you feel this descending It's very difficult not to surrender to that, to become absorbed in that. And so you imagine this future, and I have found myself over the past little while imagining dark futures where there are wars, where there is a loss of sovereignty in this country, and everything that accompanies that. And is it any wonder then that a person begins to feel down and as though things don't frigging matter, and what's the point anyway? Because it feels like the forces of darkness, the forces of lies, the forces of half-truths, the forces of all of the bad stuff that you can see happening in the world seem to do so with impunity. And it feels just like there's nothing that matters anymore, right? There's nothing that's sacred anymore. It feels like there's nothing worth fighting for in some ways anymore, because it just feels fruitless and hopeless. And if you're inclined to that direction anyways, not very hard to get pulled into that, and that's me. And I begin to be thinking about my future because I, up to a point, need to. If you can think about the future, but you need to keep your attention in the present. I've not been very good at that. That's what last week's episode is about. And spiritual masters, people who are more advanced than me, are much, much better at that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here I am, projecting this future. It's like I am in this moment right now. Maybe some of you are too, where despite everything, the future is actually wide open. All right, the end of a relationship sucks. The end of a relationship hurts. It can be painful. It can be frightening. And not really knowing which direction to turn is unsettling and difficult, and I've had to wrestle with that. But when you step back from that, when you pull out of your egoic approach to the world, that small part of you that sees the world as threat, that sees the world as very challenging and forbidding, when you step away from that and begin to look at things from that part of you that's fearless, and we all have that part, you know. A lot of us are not as in tune with it as we might be. Some people are more in tune with it than they ought to be. But there is a part of you that is just fearless and hopeful and spiritual. And when you begin to look at the future from that perspective, you begin to see possibility. And so I have been wrestling with this dichotomy, this dark and light dichotomy, right? This future, the dark side that says fascism descends upon North America and wars maybe follow, and suffering and destruction and pain and death and all of that stuff that we don't want, that we're supposed to have evolved past at this point. We very clearly have not, some of us. And I've been prone to giving into that future, that dystopian view of the future, because I'm consuming a lot of content that points in that direction, and because there are very real signs that that's a possibility. On the other side, there is this light view of the future, which is maybe I want to move to Europe, and maybe there's a whole life waiting there for me, and it's the absolute fulfillment of all my dreams as a musician or as an artist or as whatever. I mean, maybe there's this whole amazing, wonderful, flowing, fulfilling future awaiting me, that we're in this timeline where I need this time to transition to that. But every possibility is open. Now, I talked about being on the cruise a couple weeks ago with Kay, and what that showed me about there being a world out there and about this possibility that exists. You become myopic, you become small in your thinking. That world doesn't exist anymore. Just this world of fear and threat exists. If you surrender to that, that becomes your world. And I've been guilty of that over the past couple weeks because I've been vulnerable and I've been consuming the wrong material, or at least too much of the right material. Too much news, too much rage, justified or not. Too much fear-mongering, too much pessimism, too much negativity. And so I'm talking to my therapist about this dichotomy that exists within me, this potential dark future, this potential light future. And she says to me, energize the possibility. Energize the possibility you want. What did I say? Was it last week? The Henry James quote, the great power you have is to choose one thought over another in this moment. And so I've been choosing darker thoughts and therefore been feeling darker emotions. I have felt this palpably. I have felt down. I have felt cynical. And that's not me, kids. You know me by my sunny disposition, my cherub-like demeanor, as John Pinette used to say. But this whole other possibility exists, and it's important that we direct our energy. It is important to direct our intention. It is important to direct our attention into the possibility. Send your energy, energize the possibility you want, right? And my therapist talks in terms of, there's dark potential in this world. Can you, in encountering that, wrap that up in your vision of what you would like to see happen, right? We want to see peace for all people, opportunity for all people. We want to see an end to discrimination. We want to see an end to violence. We want to see an end to lying. We want to see an end to greed and oligarchy. Can you wrap your vision of the future up in what you want it to be? Big picture for humanity, small picture for yourself. What future do you want to see? All possible futures are open at this moment, all right? The prevailing dialogue, all of the noise right now is about that dark, dystopian, awful, dangerous, violent future. It's possible. Also possible is a future of enormous uplift of consciousness, where people begin to finally realize other people's lives are not their business, where people learn to live and let live, where people learn to cooperate, where people care for each other, where people help for each other, where there is prosperity for all. I know that seems impossible, but it is possible. I mean, these are extremes of possibility. And the game is, which one do you feed? Which one do you pour your energy and intention and attention into? And I'm thinking about my own personal future, which lately has been wrapped up in a lot of fear, right? Wrapped up in not knowing how I'll make a living beyond this contract, not knowing how I even want to make a living beyond this contract, feeling as though I'm trapped somewhere, trapped here geographically, trapped in a career, who knows, not capable of making my musical dreams come true, not capable of making this podcast come true in terms of its popularity and growth. Trapped in this very small, fearful, frightened thinking. But this whole other possibility exists. A life beyond my wildest imagination may exist. Maybe it's possible to move, let's say, to Europe, and maybe there's a musical opportunity there that can take off, and maybe something finally happens with this podcast where it finds the audience that it can serve, and huge opportunity and joy may follow. Well, this is just as possible as that dark future that I seem to be finding myself locked into. And it's like, which one are you going to feed, right? And it's very easy to feed the fear because that's human nature, all right? One of the reasons that social media platforms get popular is that they push the fearful content. They push the angry content. They push whatever incites the negativity in you because we have a negativity bias. It's about self-preservation. Humanity has evolved to pay closer attention to darkness and danger because to do otherwise is to die. If it bleeds, it leads. That has been the maxim of newspapers for generations. That's why the front cover story is 9 times out of 10 something horrific. Pulls you in because we are attuned naturally to follow the bad and negative and threatening news. Social media has made this its modus operandi. Push everything that causes people to get angry, push everything that causes people to fight and argue with each other, create bots that go around picking fights with people, pulling at people's ego, pulling people into that darkness. It's very, very easy to get wrapped up in that because so much of our online activity is algorithmically designed to feed that. But it doesn't have to be that way. I fall into the trap all the time, and I try to be a little bit savvy about it. It doesn't have to be that way. There is this other possibility, this other future, and I have not been indulging my curiosity about this other amazing future that could exist, this other amazing future for the world, this other amazing future for myself. And one of the reasons I've been feeling down is because I've been feeling small, and this happens to me. When I feel as though I have no options, when I feel as though there are no big dreams, when I lose my faith in possibility, I begin to hit low moods. And there's so much around me to latch on to small moods, quite apart from the political world. A relationship ending, going to have to move at some point, not quite sure about making a living, a lot of dreams that feel as though they've been dashed. It's very easy to find stuff to latch onto with one of those low moods. Tougher to find things to be uplifted by. Tougher to find things to be curious and optimistic and hopeful about. But this is a thing you've got to try to do if you find yourself also wrapped up in the fear or the anger. There's an election on right now, and Facebook, you can't open it up without seeing one side or the other's propaganda. And it's friggin' maddening because, again, it's an ego thing, and it pulls right at it, and it pulls you, and it wants to pull you into a fight online and to separate you from the other side or the other person, and to build these walls and create this separation and create this division. Facebook, Instagram, all of these social media platforms are wonderful at division because that drives engagement. And nefarious actors use that division to begin to separate people further, and we see the result of that in our fracturing societies. I don't want to get into a diatribe about that, but it's like you need to be able, at least I do, to guard your thoughts and guard your fragile projections of a possibly bright future. One of the ways you do that is to separate yourself from all of this online content. So much of it is bogus, so much of it is propaganda, and it does no good for you. Yeah, stay informed. It's important to be informed, especially right now. But separate from the emotional stuff to the extent you can. And this is a reminder to myself because I've seen in the past couple of weeks that this dreams I may have had, or this hope for an optimistic future, or this amazing future have just been shattered by my focus on the negativity and the dark side, by my engagement with it, and by my absorbing it, Last week I talked about being a neophyte, being a novice, as not just a spiritual person, but a wisdom-seeking person. And I said to myself, and I said on the podcast, that people I follow who are spiritual adepts, people who are further along the path, people who have begun to make this work in their lives, I guarantee we're not engaging with all of that material in the same way. And I mentioned Jeff Thompson. I mentioned Jim Fortin. And as luck would have it, a couple of my spiritual mentors have actually come out in the past couple of weeks, the past week, and begun to talk about this very thing, providing guidance for those of us who aspire to a more spiritual life in these very difficult times where it's very, very hard to escape the darkness. Not Justin Hawkins, the darkness, but the metaphorical, spiritual, existential darkness. Jim Fortin did an episode last week of his podcast where he reminded people to be in this world, not of this world. And that is a phrase that used to bother me, all right? Because Christians used to use that a lot. They probably still do. I just don't engage in the discourse anymore. But Christians would walk around, evangelical Christians back in my childhood, would walk around saying this, be in the world, not of this world. But it was always delivered with a kind of superiority. Like, yeah, we live in this world, but we come from a more elevated, higher place than this. Our thinking and our way of being comes from a much more elevated place than this. And the principle is actually true, but it's not just true for them, it's true for friggin' everybody. But there seemed to be a certain amount of condescension and separation in that attitude. We're superior, right? We're not of this world. We're in it, but we're not of it. And it was not delivered universally. It was delivered in a way that was very divisive and separate, made you feel superior. Jim Fortin also uses this language, right? And it comes from a different place because he's universal. He's not saying we, a certain type of people or a certain group of people, are not of this world. We're of a much better and more elevated world. He's saying all of us, all of humanity, every one of us comes from a different place. All right, we live in this material world. We live in this particular reality, but we are not human beings. We are spiritual beings living in human bodies. We are spiritual people. We are spiritual entities having a human experience. And thus, we do not need to be affected by what happens in this material world because there is the deeper part of us, that fearless part of us that I talked about, who are not affected by any of this. I mean, our existence is way beyond this world, right? Our physical bodies will end at some point. We will drop our bodies, as Ram Dass used to say, like taking off a tight shoe, but we will return to that much larger spiritual existence that we were having before we came here. In that parlance, all right, in those systems. This is not the be-all, end-all. This is a blip. This is a part of our experience of existence. But the human part of it is not all of it. It's just a little tiny piece of it. And when Jim Fortin says, be in this world, not of this world, he's saying, don't forget you're an alien. Fundamentally. Don't forget you are stardust, all right? There is a part of you that is eternal and universal. And we're just little human entities on this spinning planet, one of billions of spinning planets in a galaxy and in a universe far beyond our remote understanding, all right, or contemplation. We're small, man. This little piece of our existence is small, and there's no reason to get wrapped up in the material part of this world. And Jim Fortin doesn't. Listen to the Jim Fortin podcast. You'll get a lot of this sort of spiritual insight, practical spiritual insight and wisdom. And I'm not surprised at all that his reaction to the political news, his reaction to the fearful projections, his reaction to that dark possibility is, remember, you're in this world. You're not of this world. You don't need to fear that stuff because you are eternal, right? And there's a spirituality that you can tap into and you can take guidance from, and it's going to be okay. Even if you die, it's going to be okay. This is just one little blip in your life. And it's reassuring to me. You don't need to get wrapped up in these fearful projections. You don't need to get wrapped up in any projections. Be here now, right? And I knew he would say that. He's not caught up in the vitriol online. He's not yelling at people online. He's not absorbing any of that anger whatsoever. He's not letting all of that ego stuff come into his orbit. And he is therefore not absorbing all of that toxicity, all of that emotion. He's not getting pulled into the ego realm and living that way. He's being Jim Fortin, going on and building the life of Jim Fortin, his business and what he brings to the world and how he helps people. And that's what he's focused on. And that's what he's doing. It doesn't shake him, right? None of this needs to shake him because he is working from that eternal part of himself, like Ram Dass did, like Maharaji did, like all those people did. And then, speaking of Ram Dass, there was an episode last week of The Pilgrim's Heart, which is the podcast that Krishna Das does. All right, now Krishna Das was a contemporary of Ram Dass. All right, the next generation of people who went to India, encountered Maharaji, began to adopt those teachings and those principles brought them back to America. Krishna Das is most famous for his chanting, and The Pilgrim's Heart is just him musing about spiritual topics. And he's not wrapped up in it either, right? All this anger and vitriol. Somebody wrote in and said, how do we deal? How do we keep it level in the face of all of this darkness and chaos that seems to be enveloping the world? And his answer to that is what Jeff Thompson's answer would be to that, which is we work on ourselves. This is not burying our head in the sand. This is taking control of what we can control in all of this, which is working on ourselves. And in the case of Krishna Das, he talked about your service to others. I'm going to quote to you from the episode. He says, everything we're doing is to try to find a way to make this world a better place, not just for ourselves or our near and dear ones, but for everyone. The idea being, become and behave as the best possible human being you can be. And that thought entered my mind on Saturn's Day when I found myself in the snow over at my buddy's place, freezing, picking up and moving hundreds, thousands of interlocking bricks from around his pool because he's getting prepared to have his pool deck completely redone in concrete. A lot of stuff has to be picked up and taken away. And I don't enjoy manual labor. Not much into tools. None of that stuff is my bag, baby. But here is an opportunity to help someone who would most certainly have jumped to help me and has done. Do a thing, right? This is being a good human. This is offering yourself in service to others. And this is the antidote to huge international forces at work over which you have zero control whatsoever. But you do have control over the micro. All right, here's your opportunity to offer yourself in service to somebody else. I had a similar experience a few weeks ago when we had the huge snowstorm and I was trying to help my neighbor clean out a laneway that was going to require a lot of help, a lot of work. And a dude came along with the plow on the front of his truck and just pushed it all out for us in 2 seconds. Being of service locally. And I have to remind myself of that. There is an enormous momentum in being of service to other people locally. The antidote, one of them, to this pervasive, oppressive, descending darkness of huge international forces is to kick at that darkness till it bleeds daylight, and that's just a little pinprick in your local world, in your local life. So remind yourself that you are in this world, not of this world, right? You do not need to be so affected by the petty squabbles of humanity, even if they seem enormous. And the game is to work on yourself. The game is to be of service to others. The game, as Krishna says, is to be the best possible human you can be. And then from my therapist, to ask yourself the question, what are you energizing right now? What are you giving your energy to right now? What are you devoting your attention and your intention to right now? And over the past couple of weeks, I've devoted my attention and my intention to some darker stuff that does not serve me. That is fearful projections. That is anger about what I see other people doing and getting away with and saying with some impunity that's mind-boggling to me. And I can do absolutely nothing about that. And yelling at people about it solves nothing. But devoting yourself to the service of others brings that speck of daylight into the darkness, you know? And that can be something as simple as a kind word or just an ounce of patience, you know? I was at the grocery store a couple weeks ago and I was awaiting somebody pulling out of a parking spot because parking lots are friggin' psychotic and there's not a lot of room to maneuver. So I was waiting to turn a corner to go up one row of the parking lot, but there was somebody a few spots deep in that row, backing out and having trouble with it because there's not a lot of space. And yet it was irritating. But I'm not a honker. So I didn't, and I just waited. The person behind me starts honking like a mofo at me for being in the way. And I'm like, I made no gesture whatsoever. I'm getting a lot better at just ignoring people like that. Because what are you going to do? You're just going to feed the beast, and who knows what happens after that. But I'm just waiting on a person to back out who's having trouble backing out. Can we exercise just an ounce of patience for somebody who's doing that, or somebody who's slow at the store? There's all this stuff to be annoyed by, and people react with this rage, and it tells you the level of rage that exists in people. How it's just on the edge so much of the time. And what is that doing to them internally? What is that doing to their mentality, and how much ego is involved in that? And I understand, man. I understand the aggravation, and I understand the level to which it is exacerbated in this time. Because there's so much fear and there's so much anger, and political parties have been trading on that fear and anger to great effect. As have algorithms, as has the social media world more generally. So easy to get caught up in that, and so easy for that to be reflected in your behavior and reactions in the world. So I must be doing okay because my reactions have been muted and gentle. Maybe that's just my natural sunny disposition. But this is important stuff to recognize, and I guess that's what I'm trying to deliver to you this week, is just this idea of energizing the possibility that you want. All right. If you were sitting here right now, angry at political lies and angry at misogyny, or angry at racism, or angry at sexism, or angry at whatever, okay, justified. Absolutely. But to spend time just absorbing and fueling that anger with your energy, energizing this possibility of discrimination and violence, again, it's absolutely possible. But instead of energizing that, can you instead hold this thought of people being free? People being free to be who they are. People not being discriminated against. People who are happy and able to express themselves fully and completely without fear of reprisal. Can you hold on to energetically? Can you just fuel that possibility? That is not pie in the sky thinking. That is manifestation, really. And can we devote the better angels of our nature to imagining and feeling emotionally the future we want to see? In my case, small picture, that's simply a future where I am happy and fulfilled. And I'm living where I'm meant to be, and I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And the possibility is amazing. It is secure and fulfilled and exciting. It is successful. It is full of love, and it is full of people around me who I love and who love me back. Can you energize that possibility? Wherever you are right now in your life, maybe you're unemployed and you are wrapped up in these visions of where unemployment lands, and you're energizing that vision of the future. There's a school of thought that says every thought is a command to the universe. So if you imagine poverty, you're saying to the universe, bring me poverty. And if you speak those words out loud, even in jest, it's also a command to the universe. You can believe that or not believe that. But isn't it more helpful? Doesn't it feel better to say to yourself, to energize this future possibility where you're in a dream job, a job you love, or in a house you love, or in a city you love, with a person you love, with the absolute best possible outcome? Isn't it better to energize that possibility? In my case, energizing the possibility of touring again, energizing the possibility of this podcast finally finding the audience that I hoped it would, energizing the possibility of living somewhere amazing to me, living with people who are amazing to me, having those, there already are amazing people in my life, imagining just being in the right place for me, for you, for all of us. It's hard to see that right now, all right? Because we absorb everything we hear about inflation and taxes and the cost of living, and none of that is, all of that is legit. But it's like, can we begin to imagine, instead of dwelling in those problems, instead of projecting those problems into the future, beginning to energize this future we want to see, this future where you have love in your life, where you're with the right person or people. Imagining this future where you're making the living you want to make, doing the thing you want to do. Imagining the future where you're traveling if you want to travel, or living where you want to live. Beginning to be curious about that future and energize that possibility. It's not something I have done well at all recently, but I need to begin doing it. I need to begin doing it because surrendering to and absorbing all of this anger and limiting myself by this fear is just bringing me to bad places, and I don't want to be in those places. I spent a lot of my life in darkness. Spent a lot of my life in fear and in self-doubt and in worry and in not feeling like things are possible. And between the pandemic and the current political climate, the past 4 or 5 years have been killers of dreams. They have been killers of our belief in possibility, and we don't need to be absorbed in that. We don't need to live from that place, all right? You can live from a place of curiosity and hope about your wildest dreams, all right? That still exists, okay? And it would be a hell of a lot better for all of us if we began to energize those possibilities, okay? So that is my job this week. I put it to you as well. What possibilities do you want to energize? And which ones have you been energizing? And if you're enterprising, drop me a little note and tell me, which dreams have you been energizing and which dreams would you rather? Which possibilities would you rather energize? And maybe between all of us, we can hold some accountability and we can encourage each other, because we need each other in this moment. Talking about being the best human you can be, one of the best things a human can do is encourage other people. And as my encouragement to you, just drop me a line. Tell me what possibilities you've been energizing. Tell me what possibilities you would rather energize, and maybe we can just encourage ourselves into a better future than we might have thought we were capable of having, especially lately. Gonna go. Okay, I'm a working man. I got stuff to do. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope it's been useful for you. Do drop me a line. Let me know what you're thinking. And try to be the best you that you can be. Try to disengage. Remember, you are in this world, not of this world. It doesn't mean you bury your head in the sand. It means you inform yourself, and it means you work to be and create the change you want in the world, but do not be absorbed in this anger. Do not be absorbed in this fear. And I shall try my best to not do that as well. Thank you for listening. Good things do happen when you put yourself out there. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. We are strangers. We are aliens. We are not of this world. That's Petra. That's Petra from like 1983. The title track from their Not of This World record. And that comes from a thoroughly Christian worldview and probably has a bit of that condescension I was talking about, but such a wonderful song by a band that was formative for me, so I'm going to let it slide this week. Not of This World by Petra.